All right, welcome to another episode of New Wine Uncorked, and we're stoked to have you joining us once again this Friday. And it's exciting because Fridays are, for many the start of the weekend, and so this weekend begins the week with us looking forward to the. A lot of people are looking to the middle of the week to Thanksgiving, especially in America. And so our topic today is jumping right into that and saying, okay, so we have Jesus and we have Thanksgiving. And so what about the Christian in the 21st century? Is there anyone or anything to give thanks for? And we look around and there's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, in the media this week has just been we've been inundated with different scenarios, whether it's in Missouri and Wisconsin with the shooting there, whether it was with the jogger and Ahmad and his killing, or whether it was on Congress and them debating on whether or not to censor one of their own Congress people because of a video. And so there's a lot going on. And this is the entrance into this week where a lot of people are told to pause and to give thanks. And so today we just want to just jump into that, and it's possibly noticeable for those who watch and take us in on YouTube that Jim is not with us this morning, but filling in for Jim, we're excited because we get to hang out with my mom, Beth, and Kayla's grandmother. So this is kind of cool. And because again, coming into Thanksgiving, perspective allows for us to understand or help to expand our view of Thanksgiving. For about 4 years, and Kayla can attest to this, we spent time in Scotland, and so Thanksgiving during November, the Scots don't stop to celebrate Thanksgiving because, well, why? Thanksgiving is an American holiday. And so it put perspective for us and for our kids as to, okay, so when we celebrate things, if we are not inclusive, it's not really a celebration for all. And so this is, again, Thanksgiving brings a lot of stuff up, especially when you're talking about Indigenous people. And we've had that discussion with Jim and with the Hawaiians and the Doctrine of Discovery. And so being mindful of all that, the question is with Jesus and the follower of Jesus, what really is Thanksgiving about? Is Thanksgiving just one time during a year, or is there multiple things to be giving thanks for? And so just wanted to open this up and get us thinking about this as we enter into this week as followers of Christ. What are we to do with Thanksgiving? And so I know for me growing up, Thanksgiving, especially because I grew up in Detroit, for us, Thanksgiving was big because the Lions were one of the two teams that always played on Thanksgiving. And so part of me cringes and goes, oh, Thanksgiving was around football, but it really wasn't. It was actually about a group of people gathering together, and football happened to be on. And because we were in Detroit, there was a number of us, my folks and everything, where it became a big deal because we got to celebrate together. And if anyone knows football, the Detroit Lions have not been the pinnacle of greatness. And so we got a chance. It was good, though. It was a communal suffering, and so people who have followed teams, and I'm not a big person to highlight sports, as like this is the thing to come together. So highlighting anything that draws people together is a good thing. But it just made me realize, like, in my life, there are things to be thankful of, but there's also things to be mindful of, because when I'm giving thanks, there are plenty of people around my situation, even in my local context, that Thanksgiving this season doesn't bring about feelings and an overwhelming aspect of thankfulness, but just dread and depression and despair because maybe they have loss. And so what is it that motivates us to be thankful, and why during this time is it kind of a conundrum as to some are thankful, some are not? So what do we do with it? What do we do with as Christians and followers? How do we make this a time where it kind of can bleed into and pour into the rest of the season going into 2022?
And you always start off with those stream of conscious
And
introductions with 14,000 streams that we could talk through. I have a question, direct question for Beth. So, Mama Farlow, I got a question for you. Um, what was it like those Thanksgivings where Matt and the family were away? How was that different for you and your family?
You know, that's interesting that you would ask that, Phil. It was really difficult for me to give up on the traditions that we had always had, because I had a dining room table that I bought because I could fit my whole family at it. And so the first few Thanksgivings, it really challenged my heart because I was sad, but I love Thanksgiving. We always do watch the Lions. We watch the Macy's parade, which Detroit had a big parade. So we went down there one year, and watching the Westminster Dog Show. So it was really tough, to change the traditions. And we've never gotten back to where we all share a table together. And that is my dream. And that is one of those miracles that I know will happen and I will be eternally thankful for. But it changed the whole dynamics for the entire family. So it was difficult. I mean, it was also, what we've done is we've gotten to spend time with each family at different times. And this Thanksgiving is totally different. It's Matt's family, and my husband and I at our other son's house because my daughter is out of town. My other son has never hosted Thanksgiving. So it's, the dynamics are always changing, and I've had to learn that. And I think it started when Matt's family left.
mm,
Right. I'm imagining this year too, there's a lot of people that are missing people from their family with all the loss behind COVID, and having to juggle around what are the new traditions that our family is going to come up with. And our family was just talking about it. My wife were just talking about it a moment ago. Just what are we going to do this year? This is our second year not having Genesis around, and it's just like, yeah, we just kind of don't know. Last year we spent a lot of time driving to people's houses and dropping off gifts, stuff like that, because it was we couldn't kind of stay in the house anymore. We still cooked a big meal, but
mhm.
but yeah, just figuring out what the new traditions are going to be, and how you kind of adjust, is kind of the thing. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it interesting too, with whether it's a success or a gain in a family, or a loss in a family, that we don't think about the change until change comes upon us, And so when we were talking about tradition, as my mom was saying, you sometimes take that for granted, especially if there's tradition for years upon years upon years, and then when something changes it, whoa, and so when we moved away too, it was difficult in the sense of when you're so used to, whether it's during a season like Thanksgiving or Christmas, where you go somewhere or you get together with a group of people, and then all of a sudden that changes. And it's interesting that you bring that up, Phil, because change because of loss, though, and this is again this because of COVID in the last 2 years, where there's been a number of families more so, that have been impacted by loss, and so having to kind of rearrange how we think about the gatherings, because when there's I think a Linkin Park has this song. Chester Bennington was one of the lead singers for Linkin Park, and he committed suicide over this last, I think it was last year. And in response, it followed on the heels of another singer, Chris Cornell, killing himself as well. But before he died, Chester had this song called "One More Light," and he talks about how we need to be the light for one another, because some of us will gather together around the table and there's an empty chair, and it just is not fair. And so establishing like these routines or these traditions, but in the midst of loss, how do we continue to go forward? And so how is that, Phil, with you, and even with you, Mom, like where there's these traditions, like what is it though that motivates us? Because when we were in Scotland, what motivated us to continue to go forward was, though, we had the four of us, But then we had friends who were experiencing somewhat of that loss too, not being around family. And so we got a chance to get together and celebrate how even in the midst of change, that the Lord still provided the opportunity to gather. And it made us realize, okay, so what is this time? And so I don't know with you or with you, Phil, or with you, Mom, what is the motivation though when change happens like that and there's a significant change? How do we continue to go enjoy while still recognizing, hey, there's these feelings of loss? And I don't know, Kayla, if you have something too, because you were young, but Mom, go on. What were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say, because I think Kayla should be brought in. This is their first year trying to figure out what are they going to do with having two families in town. And we started there and that just bombed for us. But for me, what was interesting is we grew, because when we were in Colorado, we would always go ski on Thanksgiving. Turkey was in the oven and it was just the five of us. So, when the kids were little. And so we developed these traditions every year. And then as we ended up in California and Matt goes on to college and gets married. Now, what do? We have a married son. How do we incorporate this? And yet the other kids aren't, so I think that for us and Phil, it's interesting because last year, Steve and I were here by ourselves on Thanksgiving and we made a nice meal. We didn't go out and share gifts. My husband is not somebody who's going to go out socially and spread the light of anything. So, and he's not his comfort zone, but we sat and ate a turkey breast and we talked, but it was very intimate, but there was a real sadness because we knew our kids were in town, but because of COVID, nobody was getting together. And, I sat and watched football. My husband doesn't watch sports and my boys and I will text back and forth, but it's hard. And I know that Kayla and Chris honored, an uncle at the wedding that was lost. And so there was that emptiness, but the joyousness. And I think the Lord allows us to carry both, but it's hard with change. It's like this year, what I said, and I think I said it to Matt yesterday, I don't care if it's in January or February or what, we are going to have a Thanksgiving meal as a family at my house, all the kids here, all the grandkids here, because I love putting the feast on. And maybe I'll tape the Lions game and we can sadly watch it. But so, it is an interesting dynamic as you get older, because you also look at, I wonder how many more Thanksgivings there will be that we are all together. So, because it's our family, we've been very blessed. So, but whoever else, Kayla, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, no, it was cool. Definitely in Scotland. I think the biggest thing that I learned overall in Scotland was that family extends further than just blood. And so I got, what community really means is people coming together, and we got to do that. So the first year we had just met these people and there was still some sort of camaraderie between us because we were the American families in this different country. And we were all there with the common purpose of one of our parents was in the PhD program. And so we all kind of centered around that, the education. And it's cool. You live in a historical town, but it's such a different culture, especially as kids in the school. You're kind of just thrown into it. And we got together. One of the families had like a house, because most of us were living in smaller like flats, which are like apartments. So one of the families had a house and we all got together, and it was a squeeze, but it was so cool. And we got to just hang out and eat. I don't know if we actually had like a American Thanksgiving dinner, because not all of the same foods are as available, but we still had like the feast, and we got to be each other's family for that year. So that was cool. And that's kind of what we did throughout our time in Scotland in different ways, was just get together and experience community and experience family in a different way than just our relatives. And it was weird because you're not seeing your, cousins and grandparents, and it's not familiar, but change is also good, and it's needed to help us learn and continue to grow. So it stretched us in a good way. And that's what will continue to happen now as, a newly married couple, where we get to figure out the dynamics of our extended family and how we get to spend time with each part. We just are stretched in different ways.
I think back to when we first got married and what did we do to juggle? Because when we first got married, we lived in town. My parents were here. My wife's parents were in town together, and I'm trying to think what we did. I don't even. That was 20 years ago. It's horrible. I do remember it being a juggle. I think we did one Thanksgiving. That's right. We did one Thanksgiving. We did one Christmas. So we went to my wife's family for Thanksgiving. Then went for Christmas. Went to my mom's family. We did that with my mom. We did that for a while. But it was like a juggle. So Kayla, what kind of things are you and your husband doing to juggle this year?
We're extending, basically Thanksgiving and Christmas become like the week, which, really should be the case. Why do we have to celebrate these things on one day? I mean, Christ, he wasn't even born in December. We just chose that date, right? And the season of Thanksgiving should be, honestly, as Christians, like a season that we are always in. And so, that's how we're juggling Thanksgiving. We're doing Thanksgiving on different days with my family and then his family. So it's kind of just, Thursday through the weekend is Thanksgiving. And that's probably how Christmas will be too. But that's how it should be. It shouldn't be, I've always had the mentality, like, we do birthday weeks in our house. Because it's just, you got to celebrate life and the things that are present. And that's most importantly, people, each other. And when we're around each other, we got to soak up that time. So if we're going to be in a season of Thanksgiving, we should really make that a lifestyle as the church. And
because
stretching it from a week just is the start.
Right. Well, because there is so much to be joyful about. And this is the thing where the church, I think, when we experience the absence of the church in a community, in our local communities, as well as in the national community, as well as in the global community, we see the absence of joy. I think, people talk about happiness and they talk about, feeling good, but those tend to be kind of wavering emotion, waves of emotion. And I was talking to, Paul, the New Wine director of New Wine, and what they're going through right now, especially too, since the tragic accident that he and his wife have experienced with their son, and the newness, of this year too, because they've talked and how my mom was talking, how when a child leaves, sometimes there's a loss there. Well, I was talking with Paul, like when in their situation, like when we have someone around us, and we've been, my mom, was gone for a few weeks because she was in Michigan helping to take care of my grandmother, who's, 93, and she fell. And so this is a Thanksgiving where now we're having to, because she's not in the same situation, with age and with her body. And so when my mom was out there trying to take care of her, or working to take care of her, there was a realization, wow, Thanksgiving is going to be different, because for us, and even carrying on a little bit of that tradition, people would go back to Michigan, and whether or not we would stay at the house and hang out with my grandmother. But now, because of her health, and this is the thing, is there should be a joy though, because as my grandmother gets older and her body shows signs of breaking down, she's one step closer to going and being with Jesus. And so there's a weird tension there, because a few years ago, we actually went back to Michigan because of a funeral though, because my grandfather on that side had passed away. And so then coming around this time for Thanksgiving and Christmas, there's a weird like remembrance of that. There's also a weird remembrance too of when we go there, there's an absence, from when my grandfather passed away. And my gramps was one of those guys where in a room, he was just joyful. Always kind of, and he was one of those guys, he would laugh. He would always take in where you were doing and laugh and really make you feel like, oh, he sees me. And so when we come to like Thanksgiving, I think sometimes depending on where we're at, we push through the pain and the suffering so as to think that joy can't be in the midst of joy, in pain and suffering, as opposed to sometimes embracing the pain and suffering and going, as a Christian, I need to learn how to suffer better, in the sense where it's going to be painful and there's a sting there, especially when we're in a season like this where we recognize loss. We've talked to Jim about during COVID, he unfortunately lost his mother died during that. So there's that realization now too. And how you deal with that, how you embrace that together as a community so as to recognize the loss and the pain, but also, is there a joy there? And so I wonder sometimes too with Thanksgiving, when it becomes kind of tumultuous or there's this weird tension, might that be because the church just seems to be kind of confused sometimes as to how do we push Thanksgiving all the time?
I think the church is absent in that message. And since we've moved back to Folsom, it's been a real struggle to find what church to go to because of some of the turmoil at the different churches. And I was just thinking about that this morning. It's kind of interesting that you bring it. The church, to me, has a one and done philosophy about it. It's like, oh, we'll give turkeys and we'll collect toys. Gosh, we've done our job. And that's really not what the church should be doing. Each of us is the church. And that's something that, I do talk with my husband about, and I ponder a lot about where can I go and minister to people that's going to fill me and fill them and bring joy around to everybody, to the situation. And I think it's hard because I don't think the church exudes that. We send missionaries to other countries and say, hey, look at us, pat us on the back. But in our own communities and just in the lives of the people that are in the church, I think we miss the message a lot. And I believe that it's got to come from within us, within our heart, and through the Holy Spirit for us to be called out to be there. I can find joy in almost every situation. And I realized the other day when I was at a worship night and they did this thing called Examine, and they said, think about your emotions of the day. When I thought of my emotions, every one of them was negative. It was sad. And I thought, no, I've got to turn that around, because I had been chastised by one of my children for something. I had not satisfied something else. I had gotten on the scale and wasn't happy with that, so everything. And so then I intentionally have changed. And that was just a couple of days ago. I intentionally have found the joy in each moment. And I celebrate. And it's when I don't remember to pray and to look to the Lord for guidance, I am not genuinely thankful or sharing the joy. And it is really tough when you don't feel like you have a church home that you can go to. And I thought about it. If I wanted to go talk to a pastor, I couldn't do it at the church that my husband and I have been attending because they know my family. I couldn't go to the other church because they know my family, my kids. So it's a sense of loss. But the church then is not ministering to the needs of their own people. And maybe I got off topic, but I don't think the church is out there in the community genuinely celebrating and bringing that thankfulness and helping people that are truly in need of joy through Christ. And that's sort of where I'm curious how my mission works out in that.
Now, one of the interesting things about where I work is that Yeah, there's a lot of what you said, Beth, where I'm like, yeah, I see it. But those who actually are doing it, that are actually sharing that Thanksgiving spirit kind of all year, it really, it's really, it's just, it fills me up. So like, there's one volunteer family at that comes to the mission. Brother's retired. He's at the mission between the harbor and downtown 2 times a week. Just spend 4 to 6 hours just working with guys or just hanging out. And every year he cooks Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner. Whoever, like if we don't have a volunteer already, he's gonna do one of them or both of them if you just let him. And so he loves it. He loves it. Him and his wife comes down there. And I want to say him and his wife met serving at the mission. But they come down there, they cook this massive dinner because we have 20 some odd guys. And he's like, get out of the kitchen. I got it. Get out of the kitchen. Kicks him out, cooks this meal, hangs out, watches football, and he's just so this is what he's doing next week. He's gonna hang out. I don't even know if he can stay because we still have some COVID issues at the job, but he's gonna cook this meal for 30 people in our kitchen, and he loves it. He loves it. So we look forward to seeing him every time. So the ones who do it, they really do it, and they're really about it. One of the things I've been talking about at school, well, our professor's been talking about at school, is the fact that coming out of COVID, he anticipates there won't be any middle of the road Christians. You're either in it or you're not, is what he's seeing going forward, is that you're going to be in it the way you are, or you're just going to forget it altogether. So that's going to be an interesting thing that we look for going forward, is just seeing, well, how does that change our churches when you look around and everyone's like, nope, we understand this is our call and we're going for it. They're hungry and the like. So I'm seeing a little bit of that now in some of the churches I'm kind of connected to. So yeah, it's gonna be a really interesting thing. But that notion of Thanksgiving, yeah, having that be a part of it is gonna be a great thing. So
Yeah, Phil, with the rescue mission, as a work, because you're constant, you're there all the time. Is there a sense though, sometimes, I mean, I know when people come in, you're probably excited that they're helping. Is there a sense though too, where you want them to understand, like, if they only do this one time, how much they're missing out? Like, how do you convey to the folks that, hey, I know we're stoked that you're here for this time and you might only do it here, but if you continue with this, like the joy, the giving that the gift that you receive, like, how do you convey that to folks?
the easiest way, in particular at the harbor, is just letting them get more impact with the guys. So if you don't just bring the meal, yeah, but come and play cards with the guys for a little bit, just something small and simple, and you realize just how much impact they have on you. And when they tell their stories and they say, yeah, a year and a half ago, I lived under this bridge over here, and this is what I did with my life, and here's the things that I lost. And over this last year, I have learned to worship. I have learned my Bible. I have been teaching Sunday school at the harbor, and just stuff like that. When you see that change, it's just so amazing. So it's just getting people to see the change in the guys, and it's just been great. And that's what attracted me there. I mean, I volunteered there maybe 4 or 5 times, period. And then just to do like a Bible study kind of thing. And so when the job was open, I was like, oh, whatever you guys want me to do, I'll figure it out. It's kind of the thing. And even if you don't hire me, can I have an internship here while I'm not working? So I just wanted to stay connected because it's such a different place to do ministry. There's one guy who at our, not guy, but an employee. He was a case manager. And he was a pastor at a church at the same time. And he's just like, I can't let go of what I do here, because of what I'm doing at church. It's like, he knows that I'm seeing change in these guys, that I go and look at the men I work with at church and think, why don't I see the same change here? So it's definitely a thing when guys know that their story is filled with brokenness, they're not masking it, they know they need change, and they're willing to start changing. It really changes the whole game. So yeah.
Well, but it's a safe environment for them too. And it sounds amazing, because it sounds like you've got things planned and you keep people engaged. And I think that's half of it. I think somebody comes and volunteers and it's like, well, you can do this. And then there's no engagement.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of it. And I'm envious. I know I will find that ministry somewhere but that's amazing what you're doing, Phil.
And Kayla too, with the because you do worship, you lead worship for the church and things like that. And now this is your first year. I mean, I guess your first Thanksgiving not in school, correct? And so that aspect, and so you're establishing it. But when we're leading worship, this weekend, and then that will lead into Thanksgiving stuff. As Phil's trying to, when he's talking about bringing the guys in and people who are serving, conveying to them, what is it though, leading worship that tries to, when you're trying to lead people into a worship of Thanksgiving, getting them away from themselves, and so that's a hard thing though to do, because we're so enveloped in who we are. What are some of the things though that as a leading worship and things that you try to do to get people to recognize, hey, I do this morning, regardless of what's happening, there's a lot for me to be thankful for?
I think for me, it's really important, especially this is a weird week because we actually have an event on a Thursday where we usually have our rehearsals at the church. So we are not getting to have that midweek rehearsal. Instead, we have to show up at 6 a.m. on the Sunday so that we can get the rehearsal and then practice for the Sunday morning. But something that I've done for a lot of years of being on a worship team is I really, the entire week before, I make a playlist on Spotify of the songs of the set list, and that is all I listen to. And I just meditate on those songs that week. And it allows me to get into, these are not just songs, and we don't just worship with music, but I'm able to, listen to them, sing through them, and pray through them. And oftentimes the beauty of worship music is that most of those songs are inspired by scripture. And so then I can go through and read the scripture that those songs were inspired by, or just sit in scripture with those songs playing in the background and really get my heart in a place of thanksgiving and worship. And, that way I can properly lead people in that same spirit, because I think that as leaders, if we're not prepared, then how are we to lead anyone else? If we're not open to the Spirit working through us, then how is he going to use us if we're not open to that? So I think going into it with that attitude and that heart and mind, and just allowing myself to be open and to be used by the Holy Spirit is the key for me.
And when it comes to that, Kayla, that's a great point as far as like meditating on scripture. And I don't know, Phil, like with the mission and what you guys do with the Portland Rescue Mission. And then Mom, you were talking a little bit about too, is when you're stepping into a situation, this is what Sarah was mentioning on YouTube about embracing the suffering, and she was saying how, like, when we look at it, how to ask the Lord in the midst of suffering, what is it that I'm trying, you're trying to teach me through this? Because when we righteously suffer, right, and this is, I think sometimes people want to play language games on saying, oh, are you suffering because of sin? Or are you suffering because of righteousness? I think when we are suffering for the sake of the gospel, we know, when tragedy hits our lives, we know that that's tragedy, and that's part of the suffering of being a follower of Christ, like to go forward. I'm sure, Phil, that you could be angry, right? I mean, I don't think there's anyone that you've encountered that wouldn't say, gosh, I understand like why you'd be angry, especially working through loss, and even what you were talking about, Mom, with when family leaves and we don't, it feels sometimes like that's a pulling away. Like if the Lord is so communal and about love, then why does he allow for the loss of people in our lives, significant people, and it's hard because you don't want to compare apples to apples, Phil, your situation to my situation, to my mom's. And yet there's still a similarity in the sense of loss, just loss. When I lose in loss of relationship, whether that's because of death, or that's because of a divide, like when you say yes to Jesus, like he says that the world will hate you, that's a loss. If you have a good friend and all of a sudden you say yes to Jesus and they want nothing to do with you, that's a harsh loss. And so when we do that, like for at the rescue mission, and when you're teaching these men, and even in your studies, your doctoral studies, Phil, and then same thing with you, Mom, and this goes also to you, Kayla, how do we, in the midst of suffering though, keep our focus on Jesus, so as to, like what Sarah's saying, to go, Lord, to honestly be able to look, like, I don't know what Mary must have been thinking while staring at her son on the cross, but that's a tough question to ask, is, Lord, what do you want me to learn from this? What are you trying to teach me while the sting of suffering is setting in? How are we able to do that?
So one of the biggest things for me, just dealing with grief, has been, I read a book called The Tracks of a Fellow Sufferer, something like that. There's Tracks of a Fellow Sufferer. I forget the first part of it. But it's a book of a pastor who lost a daughter who was pretty young, and just through cancer, and it was just a difficult situation. And just over the years, the book was put together of 4 sermons that he preached in the aftermath of losing his daughter. One a couple of months after, one a couple of years after, and a couple just longer. One of his sermons that he put together, he kind of wrestled with the same question. How does God allow all this to happen? Where was God when this suffering was going on in his family? And he was just like, God was in the same place he was when he lost his son. And that gave me some perspective that really helped. Like, the things that we suffer, God suffered along with us. He suffers with us, but then he has suffered it as well. He's suffering as well when he sees the children, his creation, walking away from him. He suffers and loses in that regard as well. And then doesn't like force them to come back or anything, doesn't do any magical thing to change the loss, but he deals with the grief too. He wrestles with the grief too. So I know he can comfort us in the middle of the grief that we're suffering. So that gave me some help. Didn't make me any less mad at the time, but I knew I learned something at the time. But I'm living in both the worlds, where I know my daughter's in a better place, where she doesn't have pain, where she doesn't have things like that, but I know I miss her at the same time. And so I'm living in both those worlds. And as I go through holiday season, it's the same thing. A lot of memories, a lot of thinking about her, what she would be doing, because this should be on her way to being 21 in a couple of weeks. And it's just like, what would life be like with a 21-year-old Genesis? It's crazy. But just living in both those worlds, not escaping both those worlds, not looking past my grief, but learning how to work through it, are all the things that's kind of helping me through it. So.
Yeah. And Mom, we talked about this actually with when we were talking about the passing of Grandma, of your mom, because there was distance there, because we were in California. And so, but not letting that get to where, because Grandma loved gathering. She loved the family getting together and spending time in our house. And so that was a loss, but allowing the times of joy that we spent with Grandma, right? So again, and like Phil is talking about, it doesn't remove the grief. It doesn't remove the working through, but how do you take that working through then in light of what you had experienced the last few weeks, in going back to Michigan and then taking care of, Dad's mom, and seeing this? It's not like she's going to live forever, right? But we need to celebrate these days and moments, because like you were saying, when Grandma passed away, we didn't get the chance to be there, on ground, doing the day-to-day stuff and like what you're able to do now. And so I wonder sometimes too, if some of the past grief that we've experienced then allows for us to be reminded of, oh, in this moment, I don't want that to happen, 2 years from now, where I look back and go, I wish I could. And so it's a motivator. And I don't know how, if that was the case too, where when you were back taking care of Nana, is there a sense too of like, what, I can actually try to redeem the past in some sense by sharing with others how to do this in the midst of already losing my mom,
Matt, it's interesting you say that, because I said that when I was back there, it's like I wasn't able to be there for my mother. And my mother died, it will be 21 years this week, you know, and often it falls on Thanksgiving. And that's difficult because you're giving thanks, but you're also remembering. And I don't think grief ever truly leaves. And I think, you know, for myself, I hold on to memories. I hold on to pictures. I hold on to things. It's when I was able to go back and help Nana, it was amazing how well it went until some of her children came down and intervened, and it became very caustic because, you know, of the situation. And that was hard to see because I truly was, I told Dad, I said, you know, I wasn't able to do this for my mom. So it's important to me. I think, Matt, you hit it on the head. And you talk about, you know, giving thanks. My dad was here one moment and gone the next. And the day I find out I'm pregnant with my third child, and he was my go-to person, I get the call that he has committed suicide. So you have this joyous moment, and then you have this tragic moment, and you have to marry them together. And what I've learned is you just have to lift it up to the Lord and allow him to carry you through it. And it will come out okay, which it did. But then when I reflect back on it, and I think how young, you know, my husband and I were, and you boys were very little, and what we did to deal with my dad's suicide and telling my mother her husband was dead, God had to be there. There is no way that we could have dealt with that, because we also had my two crazy sisters we were dealing with. But it's interesting how God does use situations in your life to prepare you for the future. And I truly believe that. And I think that even when we are sad, we can be filled with joy. When I praise, you know, and it's interesting because I love to see Kayla lead worship, because it just touches my heart with such a joy. And what I love to do during worship is, and I've been on worship teams in many years ago, is I look and I see the faces of the people that are in heaven. And then that I know they're okay. So, you know, it's a tough one. It really is tough, because I think on Thanksgiving, if we're genuinely honest with ourselves, we those of our family that are in heaven, we can be joyful for, because they are not suffering, and we will join them. And we should celebrate that, because our God is that good. And I know myself, when I forget to pray and forget to look to him, is when I'm in this abyss of darkness. And that's a whole nother talk, but it's interesting that God is always there, molding us and holding us. And like you say, Phil, I like the idea of he watched his son. He knew the same emotion that we go through, and he will be there for us no matter what. So
Yeah, I think the remembering, you know, he's there with us in our suffering, and he has experienced suffering just as much. And when we, you know, are in those places of suffering, I think it's what it means to be a Christian, is living in this paradox of both suffering and pain, but feeling joy and knowing joy at the same time. And there is that constant, you know, because when we say yes to Jesus, the world will hate us, and we will experience loss in a variety of ways, loss of relationship, loss of people, and this just, but also like unimaginable joy of our Savior, and the comfort that he brings, and the knowledge, you know, that he is our strength, and he will carry us, and he's holding us. And so it's just like that in between that we get to live in as followers of Christ.
Well, and that, you know, philosophers and theologians have this term, the in between, you know, the metaxu, that's the Greek for in between. We live in this in between. And there's this Danish theologian named Søren Kierkegaard, who said that faith is this ultimate it's the absolute paradox, where you step forward in confidence, not knowing where you're stepping, right? Because it's not about the step forward, it's about who you're stepping forward with. And part of the thing that, you know, on our comments that Sarah was highlighting as Kayla was talking, is this idea of acknowledging where our strength comes from. You know, my strength comes from above. And there's so many things I think that as Christians, where we have these sayings that they seem like trite and cliche, because, oh, where is my strength from? My strength comes from above, and we look to the heavens. But that's the truth, you know? And I think sometimes we make it to where, because it seems so simple, you know, but we live in an immediate age, right? You know, sometimes email is not even fast enough nowadays, texting, you know, and then text is not fast enough so that you can actually notify the person that you texted them, you know, with the importance, right, excuse me. So it's like we live in this world of immediacy. And so it's hard, I think, sometimes when the Lord tells us, hey, stop, wait. What if you actually wait in this moment right here and allow me to meet you? I think sometimes when we're talking about pain and we're talking about suffering, even joy, the moments that we think that the Lord's not there might be on us because we haven't paused enough. You know, we haven't stopped and said, what does it really look like to be still and know that the Lord is God? You know, and this is what Jesus invites us into through the Holy Spirit. And that's it. I mean, Sarah brought up John 16 with this, you know, the world will rejoice in your mourning, but your mourning will turn into joy. Your weeping will turn into joy. And it comes in a few chapters 14, 15, 16, and 17. I implore anyone, whether you believe in Jesus or not, go read those chapters if you really want to know what is this that they're talking about, this idea of joy in suffering, of what the Lord, this guy Jesus, has come to do, you know. And next week we want to press into this, to this truth of, well, what does that mean to have joy in the midst when our suffering will transformed into joy? How is that? How can we, when we look out today, because we're going to see this week and over the weekend with the results of these court trials, with the results of the Congress, and there are going to be people who are angry. And the response from the church is really what we're looking at. What is it that as Christians in the 21st century that we are called to do? And so we're stoked that you joined us. YouTube, if you're not a follower or subscriber, go right below this video and hit subscribe. And then right next to that little bell, click on that, highlight that, so that anytime we go live on YouTube, you will be notified, as well as when any videos come up that you can go back and watch and take in some of the other discussions and the dialogue that we've been having, because New Wine Uncorked is part of New Wineskins Institute for Cultural Engagement, building relational bridges in contemporary culture through Jesus Christ. And primary to that, one of the first things that we learn is we do this through dialogue, through the word, the spoken word, and we want it to be relational, you know. And so we're inviting you into this relationship, whether it's on Zoom and we can relate to one another, or in person, as we've been talking about, you know, through our local context. And so we're stoked that you joined us this morning. We are super stoked that Mom, that you were able to join us this morning. Thank you for doing that. Jim is on mission. He's out there. He's actually driving with his wife. So safety reasons, you know, he did not join us. We're thankful for that. We're thankful that he's getting a chance to spend time with his family, though. And we're thankful that we do have this community where we can step in and continue to have this conversation. Thankful for the input on YouTube through our chat with Sarah and the like, as well as just the dialogue and the things that the Holy Spirit is continually pushing us into, so that in every moment we can give thanks, you know, give thanks without ceasing. In all things, rejoice in all things. And so thank you so very much. And on behalf of my brothers and sisters, Phil and Beth and Kayla, thank you so very much. I'm Matt. This has been another episode of New Wine Uncorked. Until next week, we'll see you on the flip side. Have a good one.